Poor woman, she's almost out of her mind.
Hello everybody, welcome to the channel, welcome back to the channel if you've been here before. If you do like what I'm doing, please subscribe to the channel and please make a comment, because I love it when people make comments and we can chat. It'd be really awesome and I can get to know you a little bit better. But anyway, this is a book review, so very specific video this time, and I wasn't sure that I'd get to this book or finish this book in time to do a review before Halloween. But I did, because I raced through this book. I read this so fast. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But it's Grady Hendrix, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And Grady Hendrix is a big name now. So I think probably equally for the book Paperbacks from Hell, the non-fiction book about horror, as much as his own books. But he's definitely seems to be universally praised. And this is the first book I've read by him, so I was really keen to read one. And this was the first one I found. And it was like, well, cheap. So I thought, yeah, I'll get it. And I wanted to read this before Halloween. There was a few that I wanted to read before Halloween. And this month I've been reading occult detective stuff. But I was a little bit slow on the last one. And I mean, that's an interesting comparison, actually. This took me 2 days to read. And almost all of that reading was done in the first day. I just sort of topped it up in the second day. And it's not as short, it's 400 pages. And then the other book, which it's not a bad book, but due to circumstances, it took me about a week to read it. And it's smaller than this. I'm not a lot smaller, but smaller. It's about 350 pages. And luckily, I've had that lovely pleasure of just sinking into a book and having a lot of headspace and just managing to not be too tired and not to have loads of stuff I need to do. And I just sunk into this, and it was really nice to read it in one go, pretty much. I read 350 pages yesterday, straight through, spent most of the day reading this book. And then the last 50 pages I read on the train, because I went to Bognor today and picked up a few books, which is cool. And I read it on the train there, and then a little bit on the way back. So there we go. A very quick read and a big success, which is nice, because this guy, Grady Hendrix, is getting a really big name in horror. And it's a really pleasurable book. Although there are a couple of, there is tension in it, but yeah, it's a very pleasurable book. So I've got some notes I've made, actually, which I don't normally do for book reviews, but well, I'll tell you what the plot is first, without spoilers. So Patricia is the main character in a big way. I mean, there's lots of characters in it, but Patricia's the main character, and she's got a workaholic husband. She's got kids that are getting to this sort of teenage age, and there's a little bit of tension between them. She's got a son called Blue, and a daughter. What's the daughter's name? Oh God, what's the daughter's name? Does it matter? Can't remember the daughter's name. But anyway, it's a really unusual name, actually. Anyway, her family life isn't great. It's okay, but I think he does say in the introduction that he wanted to paint the kind of the middle age that he sees around him, because his previous book to this, he says, was all about kids. I think he's referring to My Best Friend's Exorcism, and in the introduction he says he wanted this to be more about sort of the next generation, the middle-aged generation. So it's about people in their 30s and stuff. It's set in the 90s, early 90s, 1993 it's set, and this family is fine. It's a very typical family, so the problems in the house are not horrendously extreme, but she's a little bit unhappy anyway, and she's got this book club that she goes to, and it's got a really good way of introducing the characters, actually, because the book club sets up the characters, the main sort of 4 or 5 of them, because the members of the book club are the ones that become the big protagonists in the story, along with Patricia. So there's like Kitty, and there's Grace, and there's Mary Ellen, and there's Patricia, and they've got this book club, and they read these books, and each of the chapters in the, or not chapters really, sections in the book are a title of a book that they were reading, which is really cool because it kind of ties into what they're doing. And fairly soon into the book, a guy arrives, or she discovers this guy, and he's just moved into the neighbourhood, and he's a very handsome man, very charming, and he's looking into real estate. And anyway, he gets involved in all of their families' lives, and there's something strange about him, and there's a few strange things that happen before it becomes about him. And there's like a really big set piece near the beginning, which is quite grisly, and that's really horrible to read. But there's a massive set piece at the end. The climax is really thrilling. It's a really good final kind of confrontation. It's really good. So anyway, that's the kind of point of and it says, and it's quite happy to tell you right at the beginning that it's about vampires, that this strange man could be a vampire. But the fact that it's so revealing doesn't really spoil it. It changes the experience because you're not there trying to guess what's going on. You really do know what's going on. The tropes are obvious, and the title gives it away anyway. And he's playing with the horror tropes, but he's also got some twist to it. He's got some new, fresh things to sort of create with this vampire myth, and that's kind of interesting. It's not done in a typical way. At the beginning, the first sort of, 100 pages maybe, kind of remind me a bit of Fright Night and a bit like The Burbs, because there's this sort of like, oh, there's something wrong with the neighbour, and but it's not funny. Some people have described this as funny. I don't think it's that laugh out loud funny. It kind of made me grin sometimes, but I thought it was more sensitively written than that. So I don't think it's laugh out loud funny, but it is witty. I'd say that there's a lot of wit in it, which is good because that's what I like in novels. I think the way it's written is really good. I mean, Grady Hendrix definitely deserves a lot of renown for the narrative voice. I think he's got a really good writing style that really works really well and pulls you in and tells a story really. He's a very good storyteller. So anyway, Patricia, I wanted to say that Patricia's a very strong, sympathetic main character. I think all of the family members, actually, every single one of the kids, it's only really about her two kids as far as the detail. All of the women in the book club and all of their husbands are characterised really well and very realistically. You can see those people. You know those people. Those people are very familiar, and their dialogue is spot on. And what they do, their actions, their fears, their awkwardness, their comfort in certain things, their loyalties, it all makes sense. It's all very well composed. And she's a really good central character. I think she's very sympathetic. I think you do relate to some of the things that she's got issues with. And as she goes through the journey of the book, you're definitely rooting for her. And there's sometimes when you're so frustrated for her because things aren't going to plan, or things have got complicated, or loyalties have changed, and all that kind of stuff. And that's done really well. And you really do feel sympathy for her. Yeah, I've said that already. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting as well is that the main protagonists are the women in the story, the mums, if you like, in the families, but their husbands are actually villains as well. I won't say too much because it will spoil it, but they're definitely not portrayed very positively. But again, still realistically, it's that sort of small community where they've got traditional values and the men are pretty old-fashioned and pretty aggressive at times when they don't need to be aggressive, and very judgmental, and they'll make assumptions about the situation that are just mad, but just built on their negative opinions about their partners and that kind of thing. And that's done really well. And I think that that's not a problem because it exasperates the situation. It makes the situation harder for the women, but in a very realistic way. So, and ultimately their loyalties, it does make sense where their loyalties lie, and it does make sense that they've been as seduced as anybody else, possibly more. Yeah, I was going to say I might have said this already, the pacing is really good. And you don't, even though there's these big set pieces, and there's not a lot of action in it, the way that it unfolds, and if you like, the detective nature of what Patricia's doing is really well done, and you're always wanting to know what happens next. I couldn't put this down. I really couldn't put this down. For me to read 350 pages in one go is really unusual. And I wouldn't have done that. Even if I got a bit of time this week, I still wouldn't have done that if it wasn't pulling me in. And it really did grab me straight away. And the pacing and the interest, the characters and the way that the plot developed definitely kept me really interested all the way through it. There is some social commentary because there's two communities, if you like. There's the main community where these sort of middle class white people live. And then there's another sort of poorer community where the black population live, and there's definitely a difference in their circumstances, in their aspirations, in their attitudes, in the whole tone of the community is different. So, you know, that's kind of soft social commentary. It doesn't really go to town on it, but it is there, and I think that's quite good. And I think Miss Green is a very important character in it, who's the sort of black character that kind of acts as like a cleaner for a lot of them, but she lives in the poorer side of this other town, and she knows what's going on. She's very wise and intelligent, and she tells them a few times, you didn't believe me, you could have believed me, you've made this situation worse, you've got some apologising to do, that kind of thing. And I think that was really good. So there's lots of strong characters on both sides of the fence, but yeah, you do get this sort of sense of this division between the two societies in there, which is quite cool. I'd say a lot of this is about sort of loyalty and trust in personal relationships. There is this underlying sense of the ever-changing and unstable loyalty between these characters that works, because when they do change, when this plot changes and it gets worse for Patricia, ultimately it makes perfect sense, you know. And these women are driven by what they see around them, what they think the consequences would be for them to doing certain things, and for challenging the vampire, or for going against their husband. All those certain things have got consequences, and that's explored really well, and it's quite a big part of the book. So yeah, I'd say that's probably the main drive of the book, really, as well as doing this thrilling horror plot. So I think it's a really good book. It's really interesting the way it gave you a different take on the vampire, because there's certain things that he plays with. You can tell that Grady Hendrix knows his horror stuff, because he's playing with some of the conventions, but he's kind of twisted it a little bit. And those new elements make for a very fresh read, if you like, because you could say lots of this is cliched, but it's deliberately cliched because some of the things is just there as the cliches because it's quite nice to set it in a small town, to have these women being dominated by their men and that kind of thing. So some of those cliches just make sense. They're just good plot devices. It's not a problem. But then some of the other vampire-based cliches, he twists it, he changes it, so they're not exactly the same. And I think that's really cool. And at the beginning, you are thinking, well, this is not a typical vampire. So if this visitor, this new guy, is a vampire, this is not a normal vampire novel. And it isn't. There are some definite differences. And part of that also makes you wonder how the whole thing's going to conclude, because it's not going to be a stake through the heart and that kind of thing. It's going to be something else. And yeah, the ending is very, very messy, and it's very interesting. It totally reflects how the rest of the book's been as far as the relationships involved. And yeah, I mean, it was, the ending is really the ending after the big final confrontation and the ending and the ending of the plot. and then like the epilogue kind of element is really nicely written, and the last page is makes you smile, and then the last sentence really made me smile. I thought that was just a perfect way to end it. And because when I've written stories and when I've written novels, the ending, you really want the ending to leave with someone putting it down, doing a deep sigh and going, oh, that is lovely. There's a really nice final sentence in the whole thing. So don't read ahead, but it's a really nice final sentence. And then afterwards, what's really interesting about what he's done as well is he's got these extra bits in it. So he's got so the book ends there, and there's a few bits of extra stuff here because you've got like an advert for the book club, as in the fictitious book club, and then there's a guide if you want to use this for your reading group. So some questions that you might want to ask your reading group, which I think is really interesting. It's a really interesting thing to do. And you can tell that because of Grady Hendrix's questions in there, he knew what he was doing when he's creating the other monsters in the story, and looking at how he's subverted the vampire traits that you'll often read. There's a map of the area as well at the back, and then there's another bit of sort of book club kind of appendices, and then there's a really lovely letter from Kitty, who's one of the main characters, to her daughter. And those kind of elements just make it even more special. It's really cool. So it's a really good book. I'm really glad I've read my first Grady Hendrix book, and it was a success. Definitely going to read more. It might end up still being my favourite, I don't know, but I really enjoyed the experience a lot. And it's a great one for Halloween. It's a great vampire book. It's a great one about small communities and the relationships within them, and about the difficulties in families, difficulty of being a mum. That's kind of another theme in it. There's a couple of moments when where Patricia is winning in her life, and it's good. Not necessarily to do with the vampire thing. So that's really cool. But yeah, it was a really thrilling ending. It really was. The last couple of chapters, last 3 or 4 chapters are so good. But the whole experience it wasn't one of those books that really made up for it at the end, because actually that's true about the previous book I've read, where the ending made up for a very slow burn. But this isn't a slow burn really, because the rest of it's really good. It's just really well written. It's just like action wise, there's some stuff that happens at the end. But yeah, so thoroughly recommend it. Grady Hendrix, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Thanks a lot for watching. Happy Halloween.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be